Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Dole, and I am the Executive Director of the Taos Institute. I want to welcome everyone to our Taos Institute 2022 gathering, Unfolding Dialogues, Relational Resources for Global Good. It's a week-long series of global events, and we're so excited that you've come and joined us on this journey. And for those of you who don't know, the Taos Institute is a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to developing, sharing, and expanding social constructionist theory and practice, focusing on relational, collaborative, appreciative, and dialogic practices. We bring together scholars, practitioners, students, and the curious from various disciplines like organizational change, leadership, education, therapy, healthcare, environment, research, community, and more, just so much. We have publication wing that has published over 40 printed books and over 90 free downloadable books in 12 languages. We offer workshops, conferences, a diploma program, and a free monthly webinars called Dialogue with the Authors. You can find all of this and more resources like dissertations and videos and podcasts on our website at www.taosinstitute.net. We are all here together to explore, learn, share, and co-create practices from the local to the global that focus on how social constructionist ideas and practices can help us create and bring forward new ways of going on together in a world facing global challenges in this ever increasingly volatile and complex world. We need innovative ideas and practices that promise new ways for relating, co-creating, and coming together now more than ever. And now I would like to welcome Ken Kergen and Sheila McNamee.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah, so Ken Kergen is co-founder and president of the Taos Institute. He is senior research professor at Swarthmore College. Ken is a major figure in the development of social constructionist theory and its application to practices of social change. He lectures widely on contemporary issues in cultural life, including the self, technology, postmodernism, the civil society, organizational change, developments in psychotherapy, educational practices, aging, and political conflict. Ken has published over 300 articles in journals, magazines, and books, and his major books include Toward Transformation in Social Knowledge, The Saturated Self, Realities and Relationships, and an Invitation to Social Construction. And his most recent book, The Relational Imperative, was just published this year. And Sheila McNamee is co-founder and vice president of the Taos Institute. She is professor emerita of communication at University of New Hampshire. Her work is focused on dialogic transformation within a variety of social and institutional contexts, including psychotherapy, education, healthcare, organizations, and communities. She's the author of several books and articles, many articles, including most recently, Practicing Therapy as Social Construction with Emerson Rosera and Pedro Martins, and the book Design Thinking and Social Construction, A Practical Guide to Innovation in Research with Celiani Camargo Borges. Sheila actively engages constructionist practices in a variety of contexts to bring communities of participants with diametrically opposing viewpoints together to create livable futures. She lectures and consults regularly, both nationally and internationally, for universities, private institutes, organizations, and communities.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, for jumping into this experiment. But let me talk a little bit about the focus of this gathering. We are a community, and those of you who are not part of the Taos Institute community but are joining us, I would suggest that you are part of our community by being interested in these ideas. And as a community, what we do is really creative and innovative in our own context, professional and personal. We engage with people, and we take the relational ideas and do create practices that are really innovative. So the question for us in the week to come is, how do we bump that up? How do we take that creativity and innovation, that broad expanse of relational practices that we have cultivated, and bring it to more global concerns? What we want to emphasize this week is our global interdependence and the sense of urgency that we face on so many fronts. And while we may feel that some of these global challenges are beyond us, I'd like to challenge us all to ask the question, what are some small ways that we can begin to make a difference with those larger global issues? So, we don't need to put the burden of world peace on our own shoulders, but what are the small steps that we can take? And so what I see happening this week is people sharing their practices and engaging in conversation about how we might do more. And so I hope that we end this week inspired. Ken, you want to make some comments?
I also felt, and I think it was shared with the board, that there's something about the idea that has put the Taos Institute together that has sort of been our raison d'etre, that are especially relevant to upscaling in this way, to thinking about the global potentials of what we do. There's first the whole constructionist background that is important. And what does that offer, for example, as a resource for this kind of work? And things that struck me, for example, are the way in which constructionism, first of all, asks us to be humble, in a sense. It says whatever we're putting out there, whatever we're advocating, is a construction, is one way of looking at it, and is not the truth or the only way. It is an attempt to make oneself intelligible, to put values into the world without attempts to dominate. And I think that prepares one for working in sort of advocacy and greater realms, to have that kind of sense of humility about what one's doing. But along with that, constructionism invites us to sort of be curious about others, rather than trying to say, is this wrong or that right, or who's best in this whole, where should we go? But saying, look, every position about where we should go, what the next directions are, what there is worth doing in this world, carries with it some intelligibility, some logic, some value. So to be curious is like expanding the range of what's possible, expanding the range of the options that we have. So that curiosity is kind of a central tenet within constructionism. And finally, as well, this whole invitation to essentially creating something new. Because if given the constructions we have all invented these, we have co-created them. So there's nothing to present the jump into the new possibilities, to co-create, amalgamate, synthesize, and leap into new spaces of possibility. I think for me as well, as we've moved more into the relational space and as to thinking about not the construction so much as the process of constructing, that there's also other messages there. And I want to call attention to one of them, which is the way in which the attention to relationship, with that attention, one realizes that the relationships are prior to the individuals that participate. That is, out of the relational process comes we who are in it. As if to play a game of tennis creates us as tennis players. Engaging in an argument creates us as advocates, oppositions. So this attention to the process really becomes vital. How do we do it? What are the dances out of which we become? And along with that, for me at least, it's kind of an ethic, but without foundations. That is an ethic which says, look, if we together have co-created meaning, have co-created the kinds of ways we live, then we've got to pay attention to and honor and nurture that relational process, what we are doing. That's vital. We can come to blows over it, but if we tend to it, if we nurture it, if we invent with that process, so do we bring forth new possibilities in the world. So those have been really vital for me, and I think they with strong implications for how we think about moving into the world.
Yeah, Ken, that idea of an ethic without foundation, I like to refer to it as an ethic of discursive potential, that we, amplify the ways in which we can relate simply by paying attention to how we are relating. And so the challenge for the week that we'd like to leave you with here is, can we take that curiosity? Can we take that ethic of expanding our possible resources for engaging? Can we, in sharing our practices with each other, can we create some kind of synergy that helps us bring this relational stance and the forms of practice that we engage to some really hard issues like climate change, poverty, divisive politics, authoritarianism, social and racial injustices. The list is unfortunately long, but our hope is that our week together will inspire us all towards new forms of activism. And activism can take multiple forms. So how do we expand what we come to understand as social activism? Does it take place in our local context? Can it take place in our broader contexts? And how can that activism on our own parts serve as a catalyst for others in making the world a better place? So sort of a tall order for this gathering. But personally, I feel that we've done so much innovative work at more of the micro level, and it's time that we pay attention to these larger institutional contexts that we operate in that perhaps aren't working. And nothing more than the pandemic has shown the gaps and the problems that we already knew were there. But education is a perfect example, where public education is supposed to be equal for all and equal access. Actually, it showed the inequality. If you don't have internet at home, if you don't have parents who can stay home with you while you're learning, and so forth. Anyway, these are the sorts of large issues, and I hope that we won't solve the problems of the world, but we will be energized and ready to take on the next challenge, take the next step. So I'd like to welcome everyone and hope you stick with us this week.
At this time, I would like to invite Alex to bring David Cooperrider onto the spotlight with me. There we go. Hello, David. And I want to introduce you to our group here today. So, yeah, David Cooperrider is the co-founder of the Taos Institute, one of the co-founders. There were 7, one of the co-founders, and he is the Fairmont Minerals Professor of Social Entrepreneurship at the Weatherhead School of Management. Case Western Reserve University. David is honorary chair of the board for the Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry at Champlain College, the Stiller School of Business in Burlington, Vermont. Currently, David serves as a faculty director of the Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit. The center's core proposition is that sustainable value creation is the business opportunity for the 21st century. And indeed, that every social and global issue of our day is an opportunity to ignite industry-leading innovation, eco-entrepreneurship, and new sources of value. And David's founding theoretical work in appreciative inquiry is creating a positive revolution in the leadership of change, with implications for every aspect of business. Appreciative inquiry has experienced exponential growth as a change initiative methodology. David also teaches and lectures at universities around the world and speaks at large corporate and association conferences. He also serves as consultant and advisor to a wide variety of organizations, including Boeing Corporation, Fairmont Minerals, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, McKinsey, Parker Hannifin, Sherwin-Williams, Walmart, the American Red Cross, American Hospital Association, Cleveland Clinic, World Vision, and so many others. We can't list them all here. David has published 15 books and authored more than 15 articles. His newest book with Audrey Sellian is called The Business of Building a Better World, and it just received the Reader's Choice Award. Congratulations, David. And best of all, and maybe most importantly of all, David Cooperrider is my brother. And I know some of you know that already and many of you don't, but I'm so pleased to call David actually my big brother. So, so welcome, David, and thank you for being part of our opening here for our global event. And the whole event is called Ongoing Dialogues, Relational Resources for Global Good. And David's entire career has been dedicated to global good. And so I'd like to invite Ken and Sheila on screen now, because they're going to enter into dialogue with David for the next hour. And we're so anxious to see where this conversation goes. It's just really exciting. And so I'm going to hop off of Spotlight and let you three have your time engaging with us.
Thank you, Dawn. And David, welcome. It is just really wonderful to have you with us. And congratulations on your book as well. I think Ken and I are so eager to engage in our conversation today with you. At this moment, as we all know, we're challenged to engage in a generative theory of change that will inspire collaborative whole systems and process-oriented practices that might be able to restore our confidence in both planned and emergent change. I'm thinking I have to slow down for the translators. So also we're hoping that what we can do and talk about can reignite an intergenerational commitment for a better future for our children and for the planet.
Fantastic.
And yeah, well, you're doing the work, and that's why we're so excited to hear. It's always so wonderful to listen to you, David, because you have such inspiring stories and experiences that really let us all know that this kind of work is possible. So in our conversation today, we want to go beyond theory and explore the new horizons of practice. We want to explore with you narratives of hope, as you indicated, you're full of those, real stories from the field with companies large and small, with communities and with cities. So thank you again for being with us. And I now toss it to you, Ken, for the first question.
Hello, David. It's been a long time
Great to see you.
since we were together in the cradle.
Yeah.
Now, if there's anyone in the world who has been significant in scaling up in a significant way, it's been you. It's been fantastic to watch that, to be intertwined with it in various ways, and to admire it from afar. I should have known this would happen, partly because skiing with you, you were always scaling up with fearlessly, but and dangerously, but always with a smile on your face. Like falling didn't matter; it was part of the game. Anyway, it's wonderful to see you again. And okay, one of the things that struck me back then is that appreciative inquiry had just really come into focus and was taking off. And there was a way in which you could also see your own glimpse of how this could expand. I mean, there was something there already to make it more inclusive, to bring in more people to summits and then onward. So there was the beginning. And I just wondered if you might touch on several of the high points along this journey you've been taking to give us a background here.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, just thank you both, and it's so exciting that the framing that you've created here for this conference, and I appreciate and just feel grateful for being invited. And Sheila, you mentioned the intergenerational and the importance of that. And one of the joys for me this summer was five whole weeks with my 3 grandchildren, and I was just with Hugo, Uma, and Reverie, and it just opened up my heart in new ways that I wasn't expecting. They were all born while I was writing the book. So anyway, I made a promise to them. I made a promise this summer to them that I'm going to do everything I can in this next decade and a half, these decades, decisive decades, because we've been sleepwalking. We're behind in so many different ways, but the opportunities are there, and it's a couple decades that we can't afford as a human family to fail. Anyway, just a couple high point moments and stepping stones, I think, Ken. One was while I was an undergraduate in college, and I was kind of lost and not, focusing too much on my work. But I did, so for some reason, I was able to get a big grant to go to Japan and study there for a semester at University of Tokyo. But it was an amazing time for me. We came from a family without much money, so it was literally the first time I'd ever been on a plane, and arrived in Japan. And the first week we went to Hiroshima, and it was like an atomic bomb of awareness went off inside my heart, and I felt a question emerging, but it was, and I felt the miracle of life on this planet that's in our hands with all of that power. And a question was born for me at that point, what in the human sciences and social sciences are we going to discover that's as powerful in a positive human relatedness sense as the atomic bomb is in the negative human relatedness sense? Mm-hmm. That feeling of, the miracle of life on this planet. The second high point was, this is absolutely true. When I got admitted into the PhD program, it was 1979, and one of my senior student colleagues handed me your paper, the 1978 paper on generative theory and the call to generative theory. And the whole, your language and your words were just spoken, were so inspiring, To choose relationships is to choose a world. You used language like with these ever expanded move into endless forms of relatedness lies the possibility of unlimited creativity, the enormous potentials and vast vistas. Anyway, that woke me up, and it was an invitation to, along with the trip to Japan earlier, to see how culturally constructed our worlds are and what that meant in terms of the vast vistas and enormous potentials that you were highlighting there. We'll come back to that because it's that moment was just as powerful as that moment in Hiroshima for me. And then the third, just a stepping stone to the current work on a high point, and beyond my capabilities. I was so nervous to take this one on, but Kofi Annan, when he was Secretary General of the United Nations, called and said, we would like to use appreciative inquiry to host the largest meeting in the history of the UN between CEOs and business leaders all over the world. And we want to do it because we've never done anything like that. Everything's been talking heads and pre-negotiated agreements and anything but collaboration. And what we want to do, this was the first inkling of it, and it was the first summit of what's called the UN Global Compact Leaders Forum. And so, I brought together colleagues and students to help with that. I was just happy I could speak after Kofi Annan talked about it. He talked about the time now that it's time to unite the strengths of markets with universal ideals, and to unite with the power of our entrepreneurship and innovation capacities with the billions that live on less than $2 a day. And that really touched a chord for a lot of the CEOs, and it was remarkable. One symbolic thing that happened at the end was that we all went to the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, and it was the first time in history that the Assembly Hall, the UN Assembly Hall, was filled by CEOs and business leaders and not nation states. And I thought that is symbolic. That is a shift. There's something happening here. And I felt so hopeful. 3 years later, we went, and the next one was in Switzerland, in Geneva. And it went from like 500 companies interested in this at the beginning to over 3,000 corporations at the next meeting. And I started to feel feelings about this moment. What an amazing time to be alive in the field of leadership and management, especially collaborative change.
Yeah.
And that's when we decided to form the Fowler Center for Business as an agent of world benefit. And that's laid the groundwork for our studies now, and 6,000 interviews we've done. Yep.
So these were 3,000 people who got together face to face?
Face to face.
Incredible.
Face to face. And you're sitting there, like I was sitting at the table in the session in Switzerland. I was sitting at the table with like Jeffrey Sachs, the economist, and he was pounding the table. He had written the classic book on how we can be the first generation in all of human history. After ages and ages, we could be the first generation in all of human history to eradicate extreme grinding poverty. And he was pounding the table like a John F. Kennedy, like, take that in, that what a privileged time we're living.
Were there design and deliver phases to that?
Yeah. Yep.
What did that look like?
Well, we worked on, we formed many different working groups, like a group to work on the equator principles, bringing all the banks together to start developing principles for addressing at that time called the Millennium Development Goals. And then beginning projects like Ambition 1.5, where, companies would be soon declaring that they're going to play a role in helping our world get to, well, we're going to have to cut the climate and carbon impact in half within the next 7 years. So all kinds of partnerships were formed around real projects like that. And then networks were formed in over 100 countries. Today, there's over 16,000 of these corporations. And what amazed me was just seeing and hearing, at least from the CEO point of view, they're thinking 50 years down the road. At one of the sessions, Ratan Tata stood up, and the group discussion they had was very, very good. And then he just pounded the table and he said, it is time for all of us as CEOs to stand up, to scale up, and to speed up this transformation. So it started to hit me just how important, and it's not just the private sector, the partnerships that were formed and the trisectoral collaborations that were formed. So it's just grown and grown and grown since that time. Yeah.
David, back to this theme of how do we, scale up. It always amazes me that, to me, you're such a humble person, but you get the phone call and all of a sudden you're at the UN. And I think that gives me some hope that as ordinary people, we can make a difference. But one of the critical issues from that story is getting the right people in the room.
Right.
So, instead of nation states, leaders of nation states, you have CEOs of organizations.
Yeah.
What a difference that makes.
Yeah. And it wasn't always easy. There were a lot of protest groups outside of the UN at that time protesting even having discussions with the business leaders for fear. And my oldest son was part of our team. We brought the team there to that particular summit, and we noticed that the protesters were out there. And I said, Daniel, I said, does anybody from our team want to go out and work with the protesters and be with the protesters? So my son raised his hand and said, Daddy, I'd like to do that. And so he went out there, and it was really fascinating to bring some of the protest groups into that dialogue as well.
Right, fantastic.
Yeah, I think, we're living in this world where the social bond is tearing apart and fraying so much. And so, but I think when you create that wholeness where, it's like a complete protein, and a concentration effect of capacities begins to happen, hope grows and community expands. And
Yeah.
Well,
Invitation. Yeah. Go ahead, Ken.
No, it's a complicated question then. I mean, it seems to me most of these companies are really in the orbit of capitalism, which generally doesn't support the common good. I mean, companies in capitalism are supporting themselves. So you think there is hope that in a capitalist economy, a global capitalist economy, there's room for hope that banding together for the common good?
Yeah. I think, I think we're nearing a tipping point dynamic where it's going to be unstoppable. So, I started writing the book on the business of building a better world in 2000, and you can remember the unprecedented disruptions that began to, that just hit us all of a sudden, the mega floods and mega fires around the world. The global pandemic was unleashed, the, economic shock of all of that, and small and medium.
Yeah.
George Floyd was, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, and cries for justice all over the world. And now the, Russian and Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the threats of war and so on. But you could see at that, early in the 2000s, then the youth voices all over the world, Greta Thunberg is mobilizing 7 million young people saying, we've got to deal with this climate emergency and listen to it. At that time, not just the youth voices, but I sat down and had a wonderful conversation with Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner for micro enterprise. And he was given a talk and he used some words that were chilling. He said, this is the decade of last chance. And again, that we've been sleepwalking for decades or so. So all of a sudden, we formed this center and we're starting to study this, and it just exploded like headlines, like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. They brought together 160 asset managers to help invest in making the transition to a 1.5 degree centigrade world possible. Headlines: green investments to reach 50 trillion by 2025. Mark Jacobson, his cutting edge work in Scientific America was, he published the first article showing how we can be 100% renewable energy world. And he created with a team around the world roadmaps for 139 countries on how to do it and how it would add value to health and so on. And then following his work on the 100% renewable energy was created another mega community of hundreds of companies, Apple and Tata, Levi Strauss, Microsoft, IKEA, to all go 100% renewable energy. So this just started to mobilize in multiple ways. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, they invest, $8.5 million in asset management. And he said, climate action has put us now on a on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of the industry of finance. Well, those words could be said about every single industry. A fundamental reshaping of agriculture, a fundamental reshaping of transportation, a fundamental reshaping of literally every industry is starting to happen now. And like the 14,000 scientists signed the letter in bioscience saying, we're asking for a transformative change for all of humanity. Now I'm saying that because, and I'm going to come to what I think is this huge, huge call for generative relational approaches and so on, the social construction mindset. When I did call Mark Jacobson at Stanford, who wrote this classic, and it's being followed by so many countries now towards a world of 100% clean, renewable energy. And but he was frustrated, and he said, economically, it makes huge sense. Healthcare, it makes huge sense. In terms of disasters, it makes huge sense. But he said there's one variable that's missing, and it's the capacity for human cooperation and global action. That that is the single variable. So I'm starting to think, well, one other great thinker that I want to bring into this. She's probably the up and coming, one of the top economists in the world, Mariana Mazzucato. Mariana Mazzucato has done, her question is, when are economies most dynamic, leading to more and more betterment for more people, more capable of change? And she's studied in 100 different countries their equivalents to a Kennedy-like moonshot moment. She uses the archetype of the moonshot where, like Kennedy said, we're going to we're going to put a person on the moon and return them safely to Earth, not because it's easy, but because it's difficult. But the electricity that happens for the economy during those, and she studied 100 countries with their equivalents, and she argues that that leads to reunion, it leads to collaborative forms, it leads to technological innovations that just spin off, like the internet was born under the Apollo mission and so on. X-rays were born and so on. And so she's saying, as she observes the world, she thinks we are entering an Earthshot moment, probably the largest coming together of humankind that's ever happened. And so when you look at the Paris Agreement and you look at the 17 global goals and all the companies and cities that are now adopting this, this might be emerging the biggest collective action project in human history. You know, like, yes, the global eradication of smallpox happened 10 years back. And it was the first time we'd ever come together as a human family to solve a global problem like that. But that in itself pales in significance to the call of our times, this Earthshot moment. And you know, we had the other kinds of big change processes like you know, the Marshall Plan, but all of those pale in significance to what's being called for today. We are in a stage where we have to reinvent the entire material basis of our society, and how do we give it that kind of relational capacity for new bonds, new reunions, new trisectoral partnerships, bringing whole cities together, bringing whole industries together. And I think this is, you know, what's the size of the change opportunity for Taos and relational construction and so on? Here's the question that's on our mind. How might we achieve this tremendous global goal of putting in half global emissions by 2030, and then go on to win the goal of net zero emissions and a nature positive economy by 2050, and by leaving no one behind, having a just transition, for example, out of fossil fuels into renewables. And so how big is this opportunity in terms of a change agenda and for change champions that come out of organization development and collaborative processes? I think we have to think the change opportunity, $90 trillion economy, every industry, 200 million and more businesses that encircle the planet. And, you know, and many of those are economically larger than nation states. So this is an incredible moment for our field.
David, can I follow up on that and ask you if you can share how organizations and practitioners, in your experience, have dealt with impediments to this kind of large-scale change? For example, you know, how do people overcome the tendency toward homeostasis or a resistance to change, or the fraying of social bonds, or the tendency toward despair in the face of these daunting global challenges? I mean,
Right,
you know,
right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple, you know, it's a great question. And there is, you know, I don't think people resist change. They resist being changed. And there is a lot of deficit despair among our young people. A recent Lancet medical study showed that some 40% of young people don't want to have children. You know, so there is a lot of that. But what we're finding with our work with the appreciative inquiry, and I'll talk first in terms of the companies, but then companies going on to become change agents. What we're finding is that we've done appreciative inquiry summits. You know, appreciative inquiry summits, it was 300, 500. We've done some with 2,500 people in the room for 3.5 days coming together to find common ground and design initiatives and move things forward. And I've done, we've done these on every topic imaginable, building total quality, or, mergers between two $4 billion companies or whatever. But the one summit that just is so incredibly different than all the others is when you call the whole company together to design its sustainability framework and the ways in which it's going to give back to the world. And so one example of that was a sand mining company that we worked with. And in that session, in the appreciative inquiry kind of process, you go beyond the dialogical to co-design and co-action, the way you talk about it. And what we're seeing is, as people start designing these prototypes, like the sand loader operators in this one summit, they designed a $10 sand water filter to be used in developing countries to clean the drinking water, family of 8, and it with no moving parts and so on. A year later, that was being used in 44 different countries. So they had like 10, 20 projects like that. And what you see, and we did doctoral research on it, you see the company coming to life, and people coming to life, and relationships coming to life in ways we've never seen before. And these we see it in so many other companies that we've been working with. One company, it's called Nothing New, and they make gym shoes for young people, and there's nothing new in any piece of it. It's all plastic bottles from the oceans and fishnets and so on. And again, the energy and creativity in that organization. And by the way, when you're done with your shoes, you send them back and they give you $20. So there's a business logic as well. Why would they give you $20? Well, instead of this, efficiencies of scale, how about efficiencies of cycles? Every time that material is used again and again, it's profitable. So another company that's just incredible. This story, it's a model for the world. It's a Danish energy company, kind of the equivalent of Exxon for Denmark. It's called Ørsted, and they were big into coal and fossil fuels and so on. And they brought everybody together and decided, what, we're going to completely reinvent our identity, our complete business model. We're going to become a company that's building, and our mission is to build a world of 100% clean, renewable energy. You can think about how they felt about announcing this in front of shareholders and stockholders and so on. It's just like there was a lot of people saying you can't do that kind of reinvention. Anyway, their market value went up 300% the next 3 years. They won the London School of Economics award for the most powerful reinvention story of a company in the world. And the reason that's so important, and incredible, there's a big report that I read not too long ago that says that 70% of our climate impact comes from about 100 companies. So if those 100 companies could transform like that, and this kind of transformation happens only through the collaborative engagement kind of process. It would be almost as incredible as let's say a big tobacco company announcing to the world that we're going to become a nutritional excellence company. So we need stories like that, and they're out there. Yeah.
David, I've been enormously impressed with the way you've been able to bring to fore these companies that So the triple bottom line, which can invent and do things and grow from that.
Yeah.
What really kind of strikes me, and I can't quite get past it, I think,
Yeah.
look, corporations, large corporations you deal with, basically they have to stand up a stock market, and the people who really have investments and so on, their bottom line is absolutely essential to keep themselves happy.
Right.
Now, it seems to me you're saying that these companies are willing to sacrifice some of that bottom line because they're not into those inventions. These are companies with tobacco, for example, and oil and so on, that they may be willing to sacrifice their bottom line to join in an effort to enable the globe to sustain itself, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different mindset. I mean, it's where we're all based on making ourselves great again.
Right. Right. Well,
Here you're saying, well, wait a minute, it's not any one of us, any corporation. We're all going to lose, or somehow I'm going to have to, and that's a go. You're saying that can actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many forces that are happening that, I mean, these companies that aren't in the reinvention mode and cities that aren't in the reinvention mode, they're just going to pay for it later. One of the interviews I did was with Paul Pullman. He was the former CEO for 10 years of Unilever, and they launched the Unilever Sustainable Living process and declared that they're going to be a net zero impact company in terms of carbon. They've decoupled their carbon impact from growth, so they're growing without the carbon impact. But anyway, he's now a statesman talking about all of this around the world. He's chair of the International Chamber of Commerce. His new book out, it's called Net Positive, and it's arguing that the day has come where we have to really look ourselves in the soul, and that even the language of sustainability was the wrong language in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
That sustainability came on to mean less, less harm, less carbon, less waste, less negative impact in communities, less. And so he and others are arguing that the real task is to develop a world where every company in the end is net positive and has that they've made a positive difference in their world. I love this quote. I do have a quote in front of me that's in our book. He wrote a chapter in the book. He said, he said, these aren't trends. These are unstoppable trajectories. He said, what we're witnessing is a shift that's all embracing, it's rapid, it's irreversible, it's extending to the farthest corners of our planet, and it involves practically every aspect of business life. What we're witnessing, he said, is a world increasingly divided, and the public knows it, increasingly divided by companies that are seen as part of the problem and those that are leading the solution revolution in this era of massive globalization. What we're witnessing is the birth of a new enterprise logic, a multi-stakeholder, relational value kind of logic. And that value is much more than just the shareholder return or profitability. That value is judged in the eyes of, through the experience and eyes of every stakeholder. So that's leading to a logic to bring all these stakeholders into the inner circle of planning and strategy and so on. Whole Foods, for example, when they got started, I know the facility and in Sarasota, for example, they would bring all the stakeholders into the room to do the designing of the kind of impact they're going to have in the communities, the farmers markets they're going to do. And so, and they, like the appreciative inquiry methodology is one where you say every stakeholder, if it's a trucking company, you bring the dock worker, the truck driver, the CEO, the community into the room, all of that for planning. And these companies, by doing that and then finding the opportunities in their industry to do good and do well, but not in that order. It's not do well and kind of philanthropy, give back. It's do good and let the innovations emerge. Yeah.
David, I wonder if you could comment on all that you've shared with us here. Really, for me, underscores organizations, business as the catalyst for these kinds of global change. And yet we live in a world, I think, where we expect the politicians to be the catalyst for this kind of global change. I'm just curious how you reflect on that, because of course the two are not divorced, but how do we shift the populace's mindset away from looking at government to make these changes?
Well, I mean, honestly, it needs to be trisectoral. It needs to be good government, like the economist Mazzucato said, good government, long-term investments in the right things, and a lot of ingenuity and innovation from the private sector. And then the community's involvement is so important. I do think we need new models of democracy, and we don't have good ones right now. But one that there's a couple different ideas emerging here, but one of them is how companies who do this initially to help spark innovation and bring people together inside the company, they often then decide, my gosh, these relational methods are so powerful and bring out the best so quickly in people. Let's us play bigger than we are now. Let's bring these methodologies to cities and to our state. So a national grid, for example, Lindsay Gotwin and I have a definition of what we're working towards, I think, is the discovery and design of positive institutions. And we define that as institutions that are able to elevate our highest human strengths and capacities and relational strengths, able to concentrate and create, configuration and concentration effects of those strengths, but ultimately bring our higher human strengths and qualities out into the world to build a world of full spectrum flourishing. So we're leaning towards this external definition. And what's happening, this one I think is very exciting, where companies are realizing just how much comes when we bring that whole body together. And so like National Grid, the big utilities company, corporation headquarters in UK, but massive operations in Boston and a whole Northeast area, Albany and so on. And so Sherry Warren, she's the Chief Innovation Officer, she sponsored their summit to look and develop their sustainability net positive framework in every area. And then they got so excited by the customers in the room that they said, you know what, let's take our advertising budgets, which don't do much, that doesn't whip up loyalty and, you get your electric bill or whatever, and start doing summits with whole cities. And we'll host the summits, we'll bring Worcester, Massachusetts together, and bring the youth into it, and bring the unions into it, and bring the communities into it. That went so well and had so much impact that then the governor asked National Grid, could you do this to bring our whole energy planning process together? And so what we're seeing, and I've got so many examples of this, we're starting to see companies become not like more platform-like models, with so much of the work happening outside of the building. once they've tasted how powerful it is to bring every voice together inside. One that's kind of that eye-opening and a bit controversial at the beginning was when Walmart declared that they're going to become 100% renewable energy. They're going to have zero waste at every facility. I mean, you can imagine how much massive waste, and we're going to lead in things like organic foods and so on. So a 10-year project was launched, and then they realized that, you know, they made huge gains, almost zero waste in all their facilities and so on. And then they realized these are systems issues. You know, we can't go it alone. Like, we want to have more more food and stuff, but the whole agriculture industry is so unsustainable. So they hosted then, and they led, with the help of Jib Ellison, they led a big summit, national summit, to create sustainable dairy and bring all the dairy farmers and transportations and so on. And they created a framework that's still that's moving and such and making so much progress. And then they were hosted by the White House, and the president pointed to them and said, "This is an industry that's getting its act together." Another example, just one more little example of this little sand mining company that then soon became the #1 corporate citizen in America for their work on turnaround and becoming a sustainable enterprise. They then sponsored and helped support the city of Cleveland to start doing these macro summits around the theme, building an economic engine to create a green city on a blue lake with Mayor Jackson. They've done 12 of those now. So that's an interesting new dimension of institutions. It raises the question, could it be, you know, what if we stop thinking of institutions as our clients or our change targets, and we start thinking about them as the change agents? All of a sudden, you can begin to see the potential of thousands and thousands of organizations that are doing these kinds of convenings.
I wanted to touch, David, just to go back to this issue of politics for a moment, because there's a session that I'm going to be involved with later this week on relational governance. And what that session is going to do is to feature basically a global movement to change governance, mostly on local levels, so that it becomes more collaborative and relational.
Right.
You know, experiment after experiment across the world.
Right.
Have the same awareness that you do. So there's that move to indeed change politics at the same time. It leaves me also wondering, though, about the populace. And of course, a lot of what Taos do with Institute people do is work with populations of one kind or another. I mean, in the United States, where it's more important to vote because the gas prices are not pleasing than any other issue, it's bothersome because you've got a drag, you might say, on the population in terms of these kinds of changes. No, I don't want to do that. Why should I care for that? I just want to take care of myself, my own family, I think, you know, like with the Green City Blue Lake, and it's now in its 12th year, where, you know, many innovations have happened and so on. I think what Appreciative Inquiry does is it brings you know, we had small business, large business, arts and community, the museums, we had homeless, we had the neighborhood activists, we had, you know, every level of government and so on. And what happens, I think, is it's the vibration of these connections and the surprise of friendship, literally, that happens. You know, with Appreciative Inquiry, you're searching for what gives life to this living system when it's most alive, and the bonding that takes place. You know, there was never a plan to do 12 years of these things. The mayor was going to host it once, but he saw so much
bonding, but and coming together. He said, I've never seen this city. It's come out with such, he said, it's almost like having a old bottle of champagne in the cellar and the cork is just popped off. And so he jumped up at the end of that first one, and without even talking to his chief of staff, he said, we're going to do this every year for the next 10 years. And now it's in its 14th or 12th year. What I started thinking is that what we're seeing here is a new kind of engagement that you're talking about, a kind of design democracy, where it's like in the summit process, it's when people are building that first ever freshwater wind energy system. That's one of the working groups that came out of the first one. They went out then and raised $5 million to do serious planning. And then last year got 56 million to carry it out. And the state of Ohio just finally, it got through all the regulations and permits and so on. But I think that there's something to that kind of moving to co-action and real substantive co-creation. I was just with, and it needs youth at the table. It needs the unions. It needs everybody at the table, not at the inner circle of strategy, basically. Last 2 weeks ago, this one will, I'm still reverberating from it. We were asked to bring appreciative inquiry to, it's called the European Energy Earthshot. And it got started by business leaders like Jesper Broden from IKEA and Paul Pullman and others. And what the concern was just, it got triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and all the geopolitics going to be involved, and people going to be freezing in their homes this winter and so on. And anyway, it was really remarkable when they came out with 20 major initiatives. But one of the remarkable moments to me, and it just hit me in a whole different way, was Christiana Figueres. She was the leader of the Paris Agreement. And in one of the working groups, she came out and she was speaking, and she was talking about how we need to make this engagement so authentic. And she went on a rant around workers and the unions being at the inner circle of decision-making in their cities, in every company. But then she was pounding her table about our youth. She said, we talk about youth as, we'll help empower our youth, but no, they need to be at the inner circle of decision-making in their cities, in every corporation. And it hit me in a whole different way. She said, we need the future helping to create the future, And so you're right. There is just this real inclination now to make this kind of relational engagement serious, authentic, real, and at the center of power.
I love the phrase that you threw out there a little bit ago, the surprise of friendship. And it really, beyond people accepting an attitude of we can do this, there is at base this human connection, being in relation with one another, that really is the spark. It gives the idea that this is possible. I'm not here alone. We can make these changes. And there are implications, as you've indicated, between, government or politics and organizations, business and community. And so how do we forge those relations and keep them alive so that innovation continues?
Right. Yeah. I think that's the next step. We have to bring the substance and practice, and if I'm not going overboard here, what's the most important professional practice field in the world today? I would say it's generative and relational constructionism. That's the single variable. It's a variable of blinding simplicity, but we have all the technologies we need to create a world of 100% renewable energies, but we need processes that bring all the voices together.
It strikes me, and I love what you're saying, but it strikes me that some of the impediments there are structural in the sense that we've got a government which is based on antagonism, the political party system, which each party is out for itself. And if somehow we've got to move past that structure, because there'll always be the other party saying, no, that's wrong, that's wrong. So how can we generate a bipartisan sense that we together have got to do something? That's a real impediment right now that stands in our way. It bears some thought and some action, which is also the case. One of the other major events here is going to be a group called Braver Angels. And what they're trying to do is to work across these polarities, and they've managed to get inside of government to do that. So maybe there's a wedge there. But, because beginning with you both, it's out of the relationship that excitement and value and the sense of, yes, it can be done will emerge. So if we don't have that, we don't.
And that is an interesting question too. For me, like when Mariana Mazzucato kind of looks at the moonshot moment as a time where national pride comes out and people's sense of purpose and so on. And now the idea that something like that is happening at a global level around the targets of climate and so on. The question is, how do we shape this zeitgeist so that it has that kind of optimism, the hunger for innovation and desire to reach across the aisle? For me, that's a big question for us. How do we help create that zeitgeist that this is literally filled with that kind of optimism? And by the way, I love there's a definition of hope. An ecologist, David Orr, talks about, and he said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. I love it. That's where I see hope grow, and the despair goes away. And it couldn't happen unless they brought that whole system together.
But I think, just to underscore the stories you've been sharing with us this morning, or whatever time it is for everyone here, they're inspiring stories, and we don't hear enough of those stories. We hear the stories of a divisive government, politics, antagonisms left and right, injustices, and so forth. And we need to pay attention to that, but we also, how do we deal with that tension, not just telling positive stories all the time, but showing successes in the places that matter, and bridging that tension, I think.
Right, absolutely. And I love that Romanian proverb that says stories have wings and they fly from mountaintop to mountaintop. That isn't happening enough. And we've got 6,000 stories in our data bank of all these innovations that are happening. For example, you heard recently the news of Patagonia's founder giving away the company. Literally, he owned a bunch of the company, and all of his shares now are going to support about 100. And the shares are still there. They're going to, be invested in, but they're going to about 100 different environmental groups. But what's even more important than that is this Patagonia adopted a platform model where they do have 100, 200, 300 activist kinds of things that they're supporting, but they've made it possible for their customers and all their partners, hundreds of thousands of people, to join onto that platform and find where they can live a larger meaning in life, and so on. So that's an interesting idea, that positive institutions, in terms of the external way that they are creating value, that institutions are like human augmentation or relational augmentation. Think about the augmentation in artificial intelligence and the mind and the brain, the intelligence, or the augmentation where, with robotics, you can create a robotic suit and now you can lift up a grand piano. I think institutions like Patagonia are helping people live larger, more noble lives. And why would they do that? Well, their bonds and commitment to that, to each other just go up as people are able to live a life of meaning and purpose and significance.
In terms of stories, going from mountaintop, what really need to bring the media into this as well, because the media thrive on stories of conflict and loss. And, I mean, that's their drama, but somehow they've got to be brought into this area to make a contribution. So let's next major summit you have, make sure you get Elon Musk there too.
I did talk to one of his employees in the Netherlands on the display center, and that young person was so alive, and we call this mirror flourishing. But he was so alive, he was so engaged. He swept me off my feet. Again, this was in Amsterdam. And I said, "What do you do in this company? What's your job here?" And he said, "My job is to electrify the renewable energy age." And I said, "Wait a second, what do you do? Your work on the displays?" "No, my job is to electrify the renewable energy age." And then I said, "But wait a second, what do you do? What do you tell your mother you do?" And he said, "You're not getting it. I am here because I'm part of helping to electrify the renewable energy age." Anyway.
David, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your time with us and giving us inspiring stories and
fantastic. Yeah, it really made the day for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Taos, for taking on this subject matter.
We love you.
We have a full week ahead, and David, there were so many questions in the chat that we didn't get to, and
fantastic question.
Fantastic questions. How do we bring all the voices into the room? The indigenous voice, the voice of the oppressed. How do we create that relationally just world?
The voice of nature. Who's
the voice of nature? The voice of nature. And there was a big question around trust. How does the public trust companies, like when you mentioned Walmart, that they want to go net zero, but they haven't proven that over the years. So how does the public trust when a company says that? Is it just greenwashing? Is it something more?
A lot of great questions.
So we won't have time to deal with them. And I thank everybody for being here, for being part of this closing. And thank you so much, David, and Ken and Sheila, for bringing this together for us. We are so inspired by the stories and the examples of the many, many thousands of organizations that are doing good in the world. And they're there. So go to David's website, The Business is an Agent of World Benefit. As he said, there are literally 6,000 interviews with companies that are making a difference. So we need to search out those stories too and share those stories. We don't have to rely on the media. We can do that also. So let's be the voice for these good stories and good examples that are making a difference. And again, thank you, David and Ken and Sheila. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here for our global opening. And if you want to come off mute and just do a shout out, you can do that.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.